Hi everyone, this is the immune system overview lecture. Your immune system consists of two components, the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. And I'm going to start by going over innate immunity, but I want everyone to keep in mind that both of these are involved and everything is going on all at once. So with your innate immunity is always present, and it means that you are born with it. So that's where innate immunity comes from. You innately have that immunity. You're born with it. It's always there. It's always protecting you. And that will make sense once we go over the components of innate immunity. It's non-specific, meaning that it doesn't target a specific pathogen like a specific bacteria or a specific viral strain. It's just there protecting you basically from everything. It doesn't require any activation. The cells are ready, your body is ready. So we say that innate immunity is a very fast response to an invader or pathogen, and there is no memory component of your innate immunity. So with your innate immunity, there are your first line defenses and your second line defenses. We're going to start with your first line defenses. Your first line defenses are the things that kick in the beginning or the first component of infection to protect you. So the main component of your immunity that people don't think of that protects you is your skin. Our skin is a physical barrier that blocks out so many different pathogens that we encounter every day. It's your biggest organ and it's there to protect you. It's part of your innate immunity. You're born with that skin. Mucous membranes are basically parts of your body that make mucus, which is this sticky substance that's there so that it can trap pathogens and invaders so that they don't go deeper in our tissue. So mucus is a great thing. That's why if you've noticed when you are typically sick or when you have a cold or a flu, your body produces a lot of mucus so that we can trap those pathogens, those viruses and that bacteria that's making us sick. And then there's secretions. So secretions such as saliva, sweat, and tears, they all contain defensive enzymes that are there to break down components of pathogens. And then another secretion is our stomach acid. Our stomach has a pH of 2, which is very acidic. And that is there not only to digest food, but it's there so that we can kill microbes basically. So that acid doesn't allow microbes to grow because most microbes like a pH that's neutral, which is a pH of around 7. And then our microbiota or our good bacteria is there and it protects us against a lot of pathogens because they inhabit an environment so that when pathogens come, they cannot take up the environment. There's not enough nutrients. So that's the first line of defenses in your innate immunity. The second line of defenses consists of our white blood cells, which are also called leukocytes, physiology of our body, and defense proteins. So let's go through all three parts. So leukocytes are our white blood cells, which are basically make up our immune system. I want to start off by in green I wrote, they're all produced in the bone marrow. So all our white blood cells are produced in the bone marrow, which is basically the middle of our bones. And so examples of white blood cells and their function are neutrophils. Neutrophils do phagocytosis, which is cell eating, where when they see a pathogen, they eat it up, and this helps because now the pathogen cannot go on and replicate. Basophils and mast cells, other types of white blood cells, are important in releasing histamines, and histamines are important because they turn on inflammation, which is a good thing when we have infection. Eosinophils protect us against worm infections and allergies, among other things. Macrophages and dendritic cells also do phagocytosis, so they're phagocytic cells in addition to neutrophils. But I want to say that macrophages and dendritic cells are antigen presenting cells, which is what I call APCs. We'll talk about that in a second. And then NK cells, here NK cells protect us against cancer. So your immune system is also constantly protecting you from cancer cells. So that's the leukocytes of the second line of innate immunity. Now we're going to talk about physiology. When we have an infection, someone typically has inflammation and or a fever. Inflammation is a localized response. That's a fancy word of saying it's in one spot. We don't see inflammation everywhere in our body. That would not be good. And inflammation causes redness, it's hot and it's swollen because there's an increased blood flow. That's what inflammation is. We have a lot of blood flow in a certain area. Like if you cut your finger becomes inflamed. It's localized. And the purpose of it is to bring in all the good white blood cells to fight off the infection and do things such as phagocytosis. So they destroy pathogens and the inflammation restores function to the tissue. Another important part of our physiology is a fever. A fever indicates that there's an infection, and a fever is a good thing when it's for a short period of time, because by raising the body's temperature, and a fever is a systemic response, meaning the whole body has a fever from your forehead to your toes, we get the body's defenses to be accelerated, so your enzymes go on to act much more efficiently at a certain degree of fever, and microbes are inhibited because microbes do not like high heat. And then another defense in our innate immune system is our defense proteins. So the complement system, so complement proteins have a lot of different functions. For example, they function in creating holes in cell membranes. Antimicrobial peptides also create holes in cell membranes, and then interferons, which are signaling molecules that are important for stopping viral replication. So you can go on to read more detail about complement proteins and antimicrobial peptides, and then interferons are just an example of a cytokine or signaling molecule. So that right there is innate immunity. The other component of our immune system is our adaptive immunity. And our adaptive immunity responds to specific pathogens. So if you've been infected with SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19, and you do have antibodies for it and other types of white blood cells, there's a lot of research being done on this right now, but there is an idea that if you are reinfected, you do have some memory cells to protect you. We don't know how long they're lasting, but that's where adaptive immunity kicks in. And then adaptive immunity is slow. It needs activation. So you need to activate the cells. That's why it takes time to respond. And it does have a memory component, meaning that once you've been infected, your body hopefully creates memory cells to protect you from future attacks from that pathogen. So in adaptive immunity, there are two components. There is cellular immunity and humoral immunity. Both components are important to protect you against different pathogens. Humoral immunity protects you against extracellular pathogens. Cellular immunity protects you against intracellular pathogens. And for either part of the adaptive immunity response to turn on, they need to be activated by helper T cells. So before I discuss humoral or cellular immunity, we're going to talk about the activation process. Again, neither of these happen if they're not activated. The way that we get adaptive immunity to be activated is, first of all, you have to have a pathogen that infects someone. So the pathogen enters a person, and then your white blood cells, your macrophages and dendritic cells will go and do phagocytosis and eat up the pathogen. When they eat up the pathogen, they digest it into antigens or fragments, and they put it outside their cells. So now the macrophages and the dendritic cells that have done phagocytosis become antigen presenting cells, which is what APC are. And they're floating around your body saying that, look, we have a pathogen, we've digested, we need to turn on our immune system. So now the antigen presenting cells, which again are the macrophages and dendritic cells, will activate helper T cells, and now activated helper T cells can go on to either activate B cells, which make up humoral immunity, or T cells, which make up cellular immunity. So without activation, none of this happens. And so activation happens, so antigen presenting cells activate helper T cells, and helper T cells can go on to activate humoral immunity or cellular immunity. Humoral immunity is activated when we have an extracellular pathogen, and it involves B cells or B lymphocytes. They mean the same thing. B cells are the cells in our body that make antibodies. So a B cell will go on to make plasma cells, which is a fancy word for saying B cells that make antibodies. And it will also form memory B cells, so that if you ever see that extracellular pathogen again, you have memory B cells ready to go on and make plasma cells to make antibodies, which will target the pathogen. So that's humoral immunity. Cellular immunity, again, will be activated by activated helper T cells, is there to protect you against intracellular pathogens such as viruses. So when you have a flu, which is caused by the influenza virus, your cellular immunity is on. And cellular immunity has to do with T cells or T lymphocytes. T cells the two types of cells that will get activated are helper T cells or T helper cells. They're the same thing. They're also called CD4 plus cells. So helper cells are the same thing as CD4 plus cells, and they will go on to activate macrophages, which is great because macrophages will go on to do more phagocytosis. The activated helper T cells will also activate cytotoxic T cells, which are also called T cytotoxic cells, which are also called CD8 plus cells. And the CD stands for cell differentiation. And cytotoxic T cells, what they do is they kill pathogens. They're toxic to pathogens. So again, here is an overview of the immune system. And your immune system consists of your innate immunity and your adaptive immunity. And please keep in mind that all of this is going on at the same time. Your innate immunity has the first line responses, then the second line responses if your first line responses fail to kill the pathogen. And then the third line of defenses are your adaptive immunity. So go through all of this, and please keep in mind that with the disease AIDS, which is an immunodeficiency, it's caused by the HIV virus. The HIV virus specifically infects helper T cells. So with no helper T cells, you cannot get humoral immunity, you cannot get cellular immunity. So basically you have no adaptive immunity. So HIV infection that goes on uncontrolled over a long time will eventually get rid of all your adaptive immunity, and you're left with only your innate immunity. So go through all of this immune system, and please take time writing all the components of it.